one company that I've trusted with my engine management, Motorsport Electronics. The brand new ME100, packed full of features. Get this ECU installed. Maude, my Motorsport Mk2 Escort, finally ready to plug everything in. Red wires, 12 volt feed, black wire to ground. So a moment of truth, key on. Yeah, these Motorsport Electronics ECUs, they always fire up straight from the base map. Hello and welcome to this video. If you're new to this channel, I'm Marcus Hayes and I'm obsessed with Mark 1 and Mark 2 Ford Escorts. Nowadays, two of my cars run ST170 engines from Mark 1 Focus ST170s, which are basically an updated version of the very common Zetec engines that Ford put in loads of different cars. And ever since I've been putting ST170s and Zetecs into classic Fords, there's only one company that I've trusted with my engine management, Motorsport Electronics. Motorsport Electronics have a wide range of ECUs on their website to suit all different engine applications. I will leave a link to that website in the description so you can go and have a detailed look at what each ECU can offer. I've actually tried quite a few of their ECUs over the years and I've always found them really easy to install. The software is really easy to learn, and yeah, I've always been able to get my engines running and ready to send to the dyno for final tuning, and I am no expert. I found their YouTube channel really helpful in the early days to help me learn things, and I will leave a link to that in the description. And if I ever have got stuck, the guys at Motorsport Electronics are only on the other end of the phone, and they're always really helpful. My favourite car, a Mark 1 Escort that I like to call INSTA, is running a fuel-injected ST170 engine, and that's controlled by an ME221 ECU from Motorsport Electronics, which is an awesome bit of kit. But today we're going to be looking at another Escort that I own, a moredoor Mark 2 that I like to call Maude. Now previously she was running a normal 2 litre Zetec engine, which was controlled by an old Nodes Pro ignition only ECU from Motorsport Electronics, which controlled her very simple setup very well. But when I switched to an ST170 engine, I needed something that could control the VVT on an ST170. So I needed to upgrade to the ME100 ECU from Motorsport Electronics. Now recently, Motorsport Electronics decided to update their ME100 ECU, and they very kindly sent me their brand new version for me to try out. So yeah, I'm really excited to be one of the first people in the world to try the new ME100 out. So I think it's about time we have a look in the box to check out the new ME100. Alright, now I have already had this open, but if we open the outer box, you're first greeted with this letter from Motorsport Electronics with some useful information about where to find your install guides and that sort of thing. Now inside this box you've got two boxes, one's got the ECU and one's got the wiring loom. So there's the wiring loom, which we'll have a look at in a minute. But in here, inside this jiffy bag, we've got the new ME100. A couple of things that are new about this compared to the old ME100 is that this is now in a proper waterproof case. So you could, if you wanted to, mount this in the engine bay rather than bringing it inside the cockpit. And it has a status LED, which I think is going to be a really useful addition. And in terms of what it does compared to the Nodes, it's basically the same sort of thing, but this is capable of running the VVT on an ST170 engine. I think it's really cool that Motorsport Electronics do various different ECUs depending on what setup you've got. Anyway, that is the ECU. And I think before we have a look at the loom, I'll quickly show you on their website all the features. As I say, I'm not an expert, so I might as well just show you what it says on the Motorsport Electronics website. So onto the Motorsport Electronics website. I'm just going to go over here to the Nodes Pro ignition only system and click that. As I say, the new ME100 is based around the new Nodes. And down here you can see the key features: 16x16 3D ignition table, direct coil drive, wasted spark ignition. The Motorsport Electronics ECUs actually have the coil drivers built in. You don't need any separate EDIS modules or anything like that, like you do on some ECUs. It works for various different trigger patterns, which basically means you can use it on Ford engines, Vauxhall engines, all different engines. You can run it in 2D mode, which is a really simple way, or you can have throttle position sensor or map sensor for load to make it 3D. Direct serial connectivity, which is basically, you know, the fact that it connects directly to your laptop with a wire. You've got hard cut and soft cut rev limiters, auxiliary and shift light outputs. Got 12 volt adjustable rev counter or tachometer output. As I've already mentioned, the casing is fully enclosed and waterproof. It comes with a preloaded base map. You've got launch control, and as I've already mentioned, this one has the status indicator LED. So yeah, packed full of features. You can run a shift light, you can run your launch control, and as I say, the ME100 has the added ability of running the VVT on your SD170 engine. Now let's have a little look at the loom. Now, because the new ME100 isn't available yet, and because it's based around the Maude, Motorsport Electronics have actually sent me a Maude loom, but they did add the connector for the VVT control. But one thing I did have to add myself, which was available separately from the guys at Motorsport Electronics, is the throttle position sensor wiring, which isn't necessary if you want to run it in a more 2D mode, but I've got a throttle position sensor on the bike carbs on this car. And yeah, it was really, really simple to install. Obviously, I had to take apart the multi-plug carefully and stuff. And yeah, just poke the 3 wires for the TPS into their relevant pins. And the user manual makes it really clear and shows you which pins those wires need to be pushed into. Now, I've actually printed out a few pages off of the user manual just to take with me around the garage today. And yeah, here's the table showing what wires go into where. And yeah, you can see here, TPS map sensor reference. That was one of the wires I had to install. TPS map sensor signal. That was one of the others. And then any sensors, sensor wires that you add, the ground wire for those needs to go to this one, which is A6. So yeah, simple enough to do. One thing I am also going to need to do is change the plug for the cam sensor. This actually came with a normal Zetec cam sensor plug on it because, as I say, it is a Maude loom, but I did have an ST170 cam sensor plug on my old ME100 loom. So yeah, I just need to add that to the loom when the time comes, and I need to finish up the other end of the TPS wiring that I just showed you. And the reason I haven't finished those up yet is because I may as well run the leads in the engine bay and then make those wires the correct length that they need to be, rather than them being too long and it being any less tidy than it needs to be. So yeah, I hope all that made sense. As I say, I'm not an expert. I hope I haven't waffled too much. I think it's about time I boxed this all back up and got myself round the garage where the car is, and then we can get this ECU installed. So I'll see you in a sec. Apologies for the background noise, the gardeners are mowing the lawn, but I am now around the garage with Maude, my moredoor Mk2 Escort. And the first thing I think I'm going to be doing in terms of installing this ECU is running the wiring loom where it needs to go. Now, I've actually got a hole in the bulkhead down here, which I've used for the wiring loom for the ECU before. For those who are interested, that massive hole was actually originally drilled in the bulkhead to run the oil pipe through. I've got one there and one that side because this car used to run a dry sumped crossflow. Anyway, back on topic. As I say, I'm going to run the wiring loom. Rather than trying to pass this through, I'm going to try and pass all these smaller plugs through from the other way individually. This is the largest of them all, that's the coil pack plug. But as I've already mentioned, because the new Maude and the new ME100 is waterproof, you could just mount the ECU in the engine bay, and then you only need to run a few thin wires through into the cockpit to wire it up. Yeah, it's just these black and red ones. But yeah, I'm going to be mounting this inside on my switch panel, But yeah, it's cool that because this is waterproof, you can choose where you want to mount it. So yeah, I'm going to see if I can run these wires where they need to go, and then I'll catch up with you afterwards. Alright, so I've took my time and I've made sure that I've got all the wires that need to be in the engine bay side through that hole in the bulkhead. In the cabin now, I've just got the multi-plug for the ECU, because as I say, I'm going to be mounting the ECU inside the cabin. And then I've got these thin wires here. The red ones are power, the black one is ground, and the brown one is for rev counter. And then round to the engine bay, I've got the cam sensor wire here, which plugs into the cam sensor there. I've got the throttle position sensor wires here that plug into this, which is the throttle position sensor wiring. Both of those need the plugs added to them. Over this side, I've got the crank sensor plug, because the crank sensor is down there. And over here, I've got the coil pack plug, which I actually ended up cutting and then feeding the wires through and then reconnecting the plug, because this was a little bit too big to get through that hole without me risking, you know, putting the wires under strain. And I'm actually using these solder crimps that I've never used before. Basically, you feed this onto one wire and then twist it to the other side of the wire and then pull it back through so that your joint is here, and then you heat this up, and that's actually solder in there, so it solders the joint. But what I did do is I threaded on an extra bit of heat shrink before I started, so that then I can put that over just as a double layer of protection. So yeah, just need to heat this one up and then that'll be sweet. Do have this yellow heat shrink to pull over the lot of it afterwards. Going to cut this original insulation off. Unfortunately, I didn't have any big heat shrink that was black, but yeah, that'll be a nice reliable connection. And yeah, as I say, all the wiring is now where it needs to be. What I'm going to do now is put the ST170 cam sensor plug on here, and I'm going to put the throttle position sensor plug on here. Now, because I had the old ME100 in the car before, the throttle position sensor is actually going to be very easy. This was actually a plug that I added myself to the old ME100 loom, and because I made sure that the colours of wires were in the right place, and I've made sure that when I put the pink, black and purple wires onto this loom, I made sure that they were clicked into the right place. I've literally just got to join these up and match the colours, and then I'll be able to plug this into the plug that's already attached to my throttle position sensor. So yeah, just plug that in there, and then I'll be able to calibrate my throttle position sensor and use that how I was before. But if you need to wire up your throttle position sensor for the first time, like I had to on the old ME100 and like I had to on my Mk2 Escort that's running the ME2 ECU, it's very clearly explained on the manuals for the ECUs, which can be downloaded from the Motorsport Electronics website. And as I've already mentioned, I will leave a link to that in the description. And I will just quickly mention that with the two types of cam sensor plug, this is the ST171 and this is the normal Z-Tech one, the wires that Motorsport Electronics have used are the same colours. So yeah, again, I've just got to match blue for blue and white for white. It does have this extra wire here, which I think is like a shield thing, and that doesn't seem to actually go all the way to the end. It doesn't connect to any of these, but yeah, I will join that with the one that's on the loom anyway. But yeah, just like earlier on, I'm not going to bore you with the process of me sorting out all these plugs. I'm not an auto electrician anyway. I'm just going to crack on with it and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. Alright, so I'm finally ready to plug everything in the engine bay side of things. There's the VVT solenoid plug there. Don't think I mentioned that one earlier. Bit of a wiggle and she's on. Cam sensor there. I can plug my existing throttle position sensor plug into the loom like that. Now my coil pack is actually mounted under the inlet manifold. That is the coil pack plugged in. And then we've just got the crank sensor, which is an absolute nightmare with this exhaust manifold, but we'll get it done. So yeah, you can see the crank sensor plugged in down there. but definitely need to lose some of this excess wiring. Don't want that rubbing on the exhaust. What I normally do is add like a heat-proof sleeve thing to the crank sensor wiring, just because it's so close to the exhaust manifold, but I don't have that stuff in this garage. That's in the garages where I store my other cars. So for now, we'll just make sure that it's not leaning on the exhaust manifold. So that's the engine bay side of the wiring. So now I'm going to move inside the cabin and actually go about powering up the ECU. Before we mess about with those wires inside, we're going to disconnect this battery. So inside the cabin, and powering up the ECU is literally a case of hooking all these red wires from the plug and play loom up to a 12-volt switched feed, and hooking up this black wire to ground, which basically means it needs to go to the body of the car. Now, because I've already had an ECU wired up in here in the past, this is my 12-volt feed, and this brown wire here goes to the body. Now, the 12-volt feed should be wired up through a relay, and I've actually got relays over there on the kick panel. One's for my fuel pump and one for the ECU. Now, there are loads of videos on YouTube showing how to wire up a relay and what exactly it does, but basically what it means is that you're not putting the whole feed through your ignition barrel and then to the ECU. You're basically taking a small bit of current through your ignition barrel, which triggers the relay, and then the other side of the relay is connected directly to the battery, and the sort of higher load that will be powering the ECU goes from the battery and straight to the ECU. I hope that makes sense, but as I say, I'm not an auto electrician, so check out the other videos on YouTube showing exactly what a relay does, but you should run your ECU through a relay. Now, the way that my car's wired up is you put the key ignition and turn it, and then it sends current to this switch panel, and then if I switch on this main power switch, then it powers up everything on the car. This is actually the start button to start the engine. But yeah, from here it then goes into the relays, and on the earth side of the trigger side of that relay, it then goes back through this switch. So once this is powered on, and once this switch is on, whichever one is for the ECU, it then completes the circuit to ground, and then the relay clicks on, and then the ECU comes on. So yeah, all I need to do, because my relays and that are already set up from before, is hook up these 3 red wires to this red wire here, and the black wire to this brown wire here. So I'm just going to plug the plug into the ECU. Got this purple bit that you pull out, and then click it in. Start thinking about where I'm going to be mounting this and how exactly the wires are going to be, because I want to cut all these red wires shorter so they're not stupidly long. Now, annoyingly, I don't have my roll of Velcro here. I like to Velcro these to the switch panel, because then it means if you ever park it up somewhere and you're a bit unsure about leaving your car there, you can literally unplug the ECU, put it in your pocket, and it adds another layer of security. But yeah, I just want to roughly get this in place and roughly cut these red wires and the black wire to length, and then we'll wire them up. Alright, so now in theory we have power going to the ECU, and we've got the ground going to the body. I'm going to pull some of this slack on this crank sensor wire, so I don't want that wire rubbing on the exhaust. I can see now that that purple wire isn't leaning on the exhaust. So yeah, just a final check that everything's plugged in, and we should be good to go. Now, the ME100 will have some sort of base map loaded onto it, obviously to suit a Z-Tech or an ST170. I'm pretty confident that this will fire straight up. So, moment of truth, key on, and then this up, which should bring up, yep, the dash lights. One of these will be fuel pump. It must be this one, that must be the ECU. As you can see, the LED is flashing on the ME100, so that's the ECU powered up. Now I can power up the fuel pump, check she's in neutral, push the start button. She's definitely trying to fire. Yeah, this car hasn't run for weeks, that's why it took a while. and it runs. Running all 4 cylinders, idling pretty good, to be honest. Yeah, these Motorsport Electronics ECUs, they always fire up straight from the base map, but you do need to go and get it rolling roaded and tuned properly to get the most out of them. Okay, we'll flick that off, and now we'll fire up the laptop and see exactly what's going on with the settings on the ME100. All right, so I've got my laptop on, and I've now got the ME100 plugged in to the laptop. This little connector here that comes out of the back of the loom near the ECU plug has got a connection so you can hook up these wires, which then go into the USB port on your laptop. You can get these wires from Motorsport Electronics. Anyway, I'm going to open up the MITE software, which stands for Motorsport Electronics Integrated Tuning Environment. This can be downloaded from the Motorsport Electronics website. So we'll just double click that. Wait for the software to load up. Click the key on, put this switch on. Don't need the fuel pump on. And the ECU switch is already on. Now we've got a bit of an error here, although the ECU has connected because it's green. And I'm guessing this is because I've used this software on older ECUs, so the old ME100 and the ME221. Okay, so it looks like it wants to update, but I don't have any internet around here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and load my old map into it. Don't think it's going to work. There it is there. ECU data not fully loaded or still trying to connect. Would you like to switch off line mode? Yes. Right, let's just load it, see what happens. Do you want to send this data to the ECU? This will erase the existing data. Yes. Calibration loaded successfully. It looks like my map has now loaded into the new ME100, so yeah, everything should be how it was on my old ME100. I will just show you a couple of things. The cam pattern here, when it's set to ST170, that's what you need to do when you're running an ST170, obviously, and that turns on the cam sensor and allows the VVT to run. Now, if we go up here to VVT, you can actually see that the VVT is fully mappable on these ECUs. There's literally a table that basically you can determine how much cam advance happens at whatever revs that you want. So yeah, there's the revs across the top there, and there's the throttle position, and yeah, these numbers here are the advance values. And then obviously if you go up to mapping over here, you have your normal table for your ignition advance. So this is how many degrees before TDC, the spark, happens on the spark plug. So again, at the top you've got revs, and down the side you've got throttle position. So it's a proper 3D map, but you can actually run it on 2D. So if you haven't got a throttle position sensor, it will literally just determine it by the revs, which is how I had the old engine on this car set up. Now we'll go up to sensor calibration, because I suspect that the throttle position sensor will need recalibrating. It's actually really simple. Actually, I think it's up here. If you click up to ECU and then throttle calibration, okay, that option isn't actually allowing me to select it. Now, I've just noticed that I'm not getting any values at the top. No battery voltage, nothing. Now, when I spoke to one of the lads earlier at Motorsport Electronics, he did say that my map file won't work on this ECU at all, and it seems to be able to load it into the ECU, so maybe that's why certain things aren't working, because it's not really a compatible file. Anyway, just for the crack, let's see if it will start. Started straight up. Started better than this engine has ever started. It runs. Can't really tell if the TPS is working. I guess it isn't if the ECU isn't receiving any data. Even this, that should say synced, otherwise the engine won't run. What I did is I decided to drive the car around to my house so that I could get a signal from my house Wi-Fi and hook up my laptop to the internet. I was then able to push Control U, which is a shortcut to search for new versions of the MITE software. I then selected the latest version and went through the wizard, pushing next to update my MITE to the latest version. I then found that all the figures at the top of the screen that weren't working before were then working, and I was then able to calibrate my throttle position sensor, which is just a case of going up to ECU at the top of the screen and clicking that. Then you go down to throttle calibration, and then it brings up a box that basically tells you to make sure that the throttle is closed, i.e. take your foot off the accelerator and push next. Then it asks you to push the throttle all the way to the floor and push next, and then you push finish, and then the throttle position sensor is calibrated. I then noticed that the VVT map and the ignition map and a lot of other settings within the ECU had changed. Maybe they'd gone to some sort of default setting. So then what I needed to do was individually go and import certain parts of the map, like the ignition map, like the VVT map, from my map that was made when we put the car on the dyno. And then I basically just systematically checked and made sure that all the settings were the same as my old map. So I basically manually created a map that was the same as the map that was made when we put the car on the dyno. Once I'd done that, the car ran sweet.
Yeah, she pretty much feels how I remember she felt before. Happy days.
Alright, so back at home after what I'm calling a successful day. So happy that Maude is now running properly on the new ME100 ECU. A lot of the stuff I needed to do on the wiring loom, you know, a normal customer wouldn't have to do that. It will come with the correct wiring loom. It's just that, you know, it's a prototype ECU, and I'm basically using the Maude's loom, which I've made suit my car, and obviously I had to cut that extra plug off for the coil pack just so that I could get it through the hole that's in my bulkhead. And likewise with the messing around that I was doing with the settings and stuff. You know, in my experience, you buy a Motorsport Electronics ECU, it comes with a base map preloaded into it. You plug in the plug and play loom and it fires straight up, and then you take it to the rolling road to get it tuned. It's just that my car was already tuned on the old ME100, and I needed to basically transfer the data over from the old map to the new ECU. I am not an expert. I've got a bit of experience with these ECUs, but I've pretty much learned everything myself with the Motorsport Electronics YouTube channel and by asking them questions whenever I do get stuck. So if you're in the market for an ECU for your car, regardless of what setup you've got, whether you're running injection or carbs, whether it's NA or turbocharged or supercharged, regardless of what car it's in, Motorsport Electronics will have an ECU to suit. They seem way more competitively priced than a lot of other ECUs on the market, and I've heard of other ECUs where they have to have like an extra module wired up to it to run the spark, whereas the Motorsport Electronics ECUs have the core drivers built in. So yeah, from what I've seen and from what I've experienced, Motorsport Electronics are the ones to go to for all your engine management needs. I want to send a huge thanks out to the guys at Motorsport Electronics for letting me be one of the first people to try out the new ME100. I'm very impressed with it. I like the new casing design. I think it's a really cool idea that it can now be mounted in the engine bay for people that do want to do that. And the LED is very helpful as well. I didn't go into much detail actually in the video, but basically in the manual it will show you what actions from that little blue LED mean what. Now I am going to be utilising a few more of the features. I need to rewire up my shift light and rewire up my launch control button, but all that is explained in the manual, which can be downloaded from the Motorsport Electronics website. So I think that's enough waffling. I'm going to end this video here. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. If you're new, click subscribe to keep up to date with all my future uploads, and check the links in the description to my social media and my own website. All the links you need for Motorsport Electronics will also be in the description. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.